Hi, everybody. Last year, I came up into Holy Week with an idea of taking the hymnal and praying through a hymn each day for Holy Week. I kind of tossed it out there for myself as a challenge. And if you go back and look at season 1 on YouTube here, you can see that I majestically failed. I made it through the first few days, but didn't make it through the entirety of Holy Week. So rather than just say, oh, well, I failed, I'm going to do this attempt again this year. And so to begin with, we'll take the first day of Holy Week, Palm Sunday, and talk about one of the hymns that is significant for that particular day. Now, the default hymn for Palm Sunday is probably All Glory, Laud, and Honor. Yes, you now have it going through your head. And I did cover that one last year. But I thought instead this year I will take the second best known of the hymns, Ride On in Majesty. And I think more than All Glory, Laud, and Honor, the music that Ride On in Majesty, as well as the words, really give us a sense that not only is this a day of majesty, of pomp and circumstance, of joy and shouting hosannas, but it is also the start of Jesus's walk to the cross. It gives us a mix of both that joy and wonder and the awe and humility that we feel as our week goes on. So a little bit about this hymn to begin with. It is written, the words are written by Henry Hart Millman, who was a late 18th century, early 19th century professor at Oxford University, and he was a professor of poetry. And that very clearly is reflective in the hymns that he wrote. He contributed a total of 13 hymns to a book called Hymns by an author, Heber, who not so much an author, but a compiler of that particular book. And if you take a few moments and put it into Google and look at that book, just put in Heber, Heber Hymns. It's a beautifully illustrated book that has a different set of lyrics from different hymns for most of the Sundays and all of the feast days in the church calendar year. It's all in black and white, and it is just breathtaking, the illustrations that go along with the lyrics. But of course, I digress. In 1827, our professor of poetry, Millman, decided to have a series of lectures, which were called the Bampton Lectures. And soon after that, he began to realize that his pull was more towards theology than just poetry. And so he also wrote a book called The History of the Jews. And this is believed to be the first time that the Bible could be studied as literature and not just as the sacred text that could be read and interpreted, but not studied in the same way that we study the rest of our literature. He also self-published a book called Selections of Psalms and Hymns in 1837. Now, that's the lyricist of our hymn. The music itself is set in our hymnal to two different tunes. One of them is called Winchester New, and one of them is called St. Drosten. And St. Drosten is written by John Bacchus Dykes, and Winchester New was first printed in 1690 in a book of hymns that came out of North Germany. And so that gives us a little bit of context to the hymn itself, but what about those words? So as always, we're just going to take a few minutes to sit back in our chairs and get comfortable. Take a few deep breaths. Let us just clear out our minds and our hearts. Settle down a little bit. Let's hear the words of this hymn and see how they strike us on this particular Palm Sunday. Ride on in majesty. Hark, all the tribes, Hosanna cry. Thy humble breast pursues his road with psalms and scattered garments strewn. Ride on in majesty. In lowly pomp, ride on to die. O Christ, the triumphs now begin over captive death and conquered sin. Ride on in majesty. The angel armies of the sky look down with sad and wondering eyes to see the approaching sacrifice. Ride on in majesty. The last and fiercest strife is nigh. The Father on his sapphire throne expects his own anointed Son. Ride on in majesty. In lowly pomp, ride on to die. Bow thy meek head to mortal pain, then take, O God, thy power and reign. It's a lot of descriptions and visual images that come through that particular hymn. The choice of the word majesty has a lot of complexity to it, doesn't it? It's not just, as it says elsewhere in the hymn, just pomp and circumstance, but there's a dignity and a respectability to this. Sort of a reminder that even if the crowd that was around him that day, even if his closest friends and disciples weren't aware of it, that Jesus was very aware that he was not coming into Jerusalem to have a rebellion or to take his place as the king of all of Israel, or to even take his place as a ruler in the city. He was coming in to Jerusalem that day solely for the intention of sacrificing. All that that's going on around him, the palms being laid before him, people taking off their cloaks and laying it on the road before him, people treating him like royalty. And yet, as Jesus came in and looked at their faces, the faces of the people that he had just met for the first time, the faces of the strangers that he had not even met yet, and the faces of those who he has been with for years, whose faces he knows so well, whose hearts and minds he knows so well. And to look at each one of them and think, they don't understand. They don't know what's coming. And then for Jesus to look at us today and say, you know what's coming. And yet I still expect you to come and stand on the side of the road and wave me on as I go. Jesus does take the power and reign, as our hymn concludes, but only after he goes through intense human pain and suffering. Suffering that didn't just happen in that short period of time on Good Friday, but the humanity that Jesus was and is and always will be must have been brokenhearted. Almost like arriving at a celebration with good news all around, and yet carrying with yourself the bad news that you have. So when have we all been at a point in life where we've had that same kind of almost paradoxal, those two separate, very different senses that we've had to carry with ourselves? Have we experienced times when we have put on a brave face, knowing something that we knew that was not a positive thing, was not the good news, and yet having to be around others and be in situations where we had to smile and see it through? And why do we do that? Well, the simple answer, the easy answer, is because we love the people that are around us. And we don't want them to not feel the joy of celebration. And I believe strongly that Jesus was the same way. He knew that in a week's time, every one of those friends would be heartbroken, devastated, inconsolable. And yet he wants them to have this time, this good opportunity, this good, fun, joy-filled chance to celebrate. And it's those memories that come back to the disciples later on. It's not just the pain of that week, the self-disappointment, but those memories of when they celebrated Jesus being in their midst. And so, as we move into this Holy Week, here's a thought for you to contemplate. How do we make space for celebration in our lives? And most importantly, how do we make space to celebrate Jesus's presence in our lives? Hopefully it's something that you can think about and contemplate on the beginning of this week and come to a realization that there are opportunities to always celebrate Jesus's presence in our lives, and that you can take maybe just a little bit of time, set it aside in your schedule to be able to thank God for those opportunities to celebrate Jesus and to celebrate each other as we move into the somberness of Holy Week. So thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule today to sit with me and think about this hymn and how it describes the situation that we have on Palm Sunday. So take care. I'll see you tomorrow. God bless.